Last night, Australian time, the Executive Committee of the World Anti-Doping Agency met online to discuss the latest in the ongoing saga regarding the 23 positive tests returned by Chinese swimmers before the Tokyo Olympic Games. As we know, there's an independent investigation that is taking place into WADA's handling of that. But there were some really interesting facts that were given out last night to the Executive Committee board members, who were also allowed to ask questions afterwards. Now, I spoke to the founding president of WADA, Dick Pound, after the meeting and asked him a few of the other questions that still remain. We know there's an independent review being done, but what will come of that given this criticism continues to be sustained, particularly from the US?
Well, first of all, we have to wait to see what the investigator concludes as a result of the work he does. He's under some pressure to try and at least have a preliminary report prior to Paris. And if he were to recommend some other treatment of the matter, then there's then be time to do it. But we just have to wait and see on that. As far as the controversy, there are people out there who specialize in attacking WADA, and I guess that's something you have to live with. What you do is what we did today, to and with the foundation board and the experts, both scientific and legal. Say that this proceeded in accordance with the standard procedure. All the evidence pointed to a contamination. There was not some organized doping activity at all in all of these clubs, different coaches and different athletes from all over China. I mean, none of the indications pointed that way. It all looked towards contamination. And you just have to say, I'm sorry, whatever you might have thought, whatever you might have wanted, whatever you might have hoped to embarrass the Chinese into something that clearly by experts having no axe to grind was found not to be doping, but contamination. That's the end of the story.
One of the facts that was brought out last night was that the degree of positiveness, if that's the right terminology, was a few billionths of a milligram. Where the standard treatment, if you were to take this as a medication, would be something like 3,000 times that, or some enormous amount. So it seems incredibly small, which was just one of the reasons why they thought it was contamination rather than any other, planned cheating. But there seems to be a real sense of anger within WADA that their description of what happened has not been accepted, either by the media or by USADA or any of the other number of critics. And one thing that struck me is that in anti-doping itself, it's very hard to prove your innocence once a story has developed, once there's a narrative. And I guess that's what's feeding in here as well.
Well, that's one of the things that you have to expect if you're basically walking around with a bullseye in the middle of your chest. Somebody is going to, for whatever reason it may be, is going to criticize. The disappointing thing about USADA is that it has done nothing to suggest what ought to be done. And the timing of all of this is, in my respectful opinion, somewhat suspect. And the fact that the relations between China and the United States at the moment are rather chilly. USADA is financed 100% by the U.S. government. Is there a connection between that or not? There's absolutely no reason that we would do anything to favor any country, and certainly that applies to the the superpowers as well. I mean, ask Russia what they think. Ask the Chinese. But it was WADA that pursued the Sun Yang to the end. So there's no sense of favoritism or being unwilling to pull the trigger on a superpower, same as any other country.
Why do you think this would happen? And you mentioned politics there and the strained relationship between the USA and China at the moment, which continues. But the American government funds WADA. It contributes a lot of money to WADA. In the past, USADA has been helpful, has it not? So I wonder why it would go down this path. And some of the claims that Travis Tygart has been making include that WADA essentially needs to be reshaped or redone or reconfigured, a bit of a new model. Why would he be saying that? Do you think the US might have an idea about what a new model might look like? And are they heading down that particular path without having said so?
Who knows? They certainly have not shared any solution-oriented information with WADA. They haven't consulted with it. They didn't consult before making these statements about the Chinese, which are now 3 years old. And so I don't know what the end game is here, but it has certainly been the distortions relating to WADA are not limited to this particular episode. They've happened before, so it's a pattern of conduct, and it's disappointing that the board of USADA doesn't seem able to control its chief executive.
One of the other facts that was explained last night was that 90% of professional athletes, collegiate athletes inside the USA are not tested under the World Anti-Doping Code. They're not bound by that. And that might surprise a lot of people. But I just wonder if the US decided to withdraw its portion of the funding of WADA, could WADA survive?
Oh, of course, and whether the USA would survive in public opinion remains to be seen. And by the way, despite its claims to the contrary, the US is not the largest contributor to WADA. Canada gives more than the USA, so there's a lot of shading here that really doesn't stand up to close scrutiny.
And so one of the challenges now is repairing trust in the system, particularly for the athletes. Do you think that some of the damage done because of the narrative and in the telling of this story is going to be too hard to repair? Will there be scars that remain? Because there were a lot of athletes that were brought in and asked to, express their concerns about the fact that it looked like there were 23 positives and why weren't they treated the same way?
And the reasons have been given. And I'm not. I don't do the day-to-day stuff at WADA anymore. I'm discovering that the most past thing in the world is a past president. So.
But your voice is still short. So can athletes can that trust in the system be regained by athletes worldwide when they've been subjected to this narrative?
I certainly hope so, and we will do our best to demonstrate that we are transparent. I mean, there are a whole bunch of data protection issues involved in this. It's a complicated field these days. It's an absolute minefield. But yes, we will certainly do that. I would have thought. Now I don't know what your view on something like this is, but one of the things that the best athletes are able to do is to shed doubts about their performance and you know, the fear of losing, all of those sorts of things. Why, 2 months before the Olympics, when they need to be at their best and not filled with doubts, would you fan this particular fire and create doubts? That's going to have a negative impact on performance, particularly in the United States, which is where all bunch of the noise is coming from, and that, to me at least, does not demonstrate the activity of an organization that is concerned with high performance, but wants it clean, as everyone else does too. You're now creating doubts in your athletes as to whether, you know, maybe I can't expect to win against athletes that I think might be or have doped. You don't need that baggage, and your national institutions should not be creating doubts, particularly where they're not substantiated. I mean, the evidence simply did not point towards doping. It pointed only towards contamination. And it's not the first time, you know, contamination has happened. I mean, clenbuterol stuff, and you know, pigs and boars with too much testosterone or whatever it is, you know, can produce that kind of an impact, and they simply don't count as doping cases.
I note that one of the concerns last night was expressed by the Australian member, Darren Mullally, who was filling in or deputising for the Australian Sports Minister, Annika Wells. And he put a series of opinions and asked one question. And I think the overriding question for him, which means it's an overriding question for the government here, was why was it that the executive board was not briefed on this case? Because it would seem that if that had happened at the time, maybe we wouldn't be in the situation we're in at the moment.
I can't answer that because I don't know. But I mean, in a sense, most of these things are governed by a protocol, and you need expertise. You need the scientific expertise. You need the legal expertise. You need the administrative expertise. That's not the role of an executive committee or a foundation board. They're meant to be above the fray and hire the right people to do the right things and oversee, you know, from a distance on a regular basis, whether they've done that. And I think, with the greatest respect to USADA, that's what was done.
Dick Pound, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.